did work undercover for the FBI and ATF during my tenure with Death Row Records and Wright Protective Services.
There was a report that was written by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department about the altercation with Kevin Hackey. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department wasn't concerned about anybody's safety, but they were more concerned about the public relations of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and strangely, the public relations of the Compton Police Department. Now, since Compton wasn't going to be involved in the case for several days later, why would the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department be so concerned about the public relations of the Compton Police Department if they weren't there yet?
A CEO of a company or the wife of somebody being murdered is one kind of investigation, but now you're talking about something where there was all kinds of alleged baggage involved.
This is where you begin to see Compton Police Department inject themselves into the middle of the Las Vegas investigation under the false pretense that it's a gang activity.
And again, that first night, I don't think he was totally forthcoming on everything he knew.
So they approached Frank Alexander to basically lie to the Vegas Police Department and tell them that a chain was actually snatched the day of the shooting, September 6th, earlier that morning. And that was the story that was concocted then. It happened that day. Nothing about the Lakewood Mall and nothing about anything happening months earlier. It was all happening that day. And that's what they told Frank Alexander to tell the cops, and that's what Frank Alexander told the cops.
Every time I think it's over, they drag me right back in again.
And later on, when Frank Alexander is asked to repeat that story again, he refuses.
We were supposed to went down to Vegas, me, you, and Malcolm, because Malcolm can ID the person. We were supposed to send you and him down to ID, to see if you look at the pictures, because they had a suspect, and that's when they had Orlando as a suspect, and then they were going to just have y'all look at the pictures before then just to see if maybe that, made your memory get better or whatever. So you can describe somebody, but once you see a picture, oh yeah, that's him. And so that's what they were going to have you to do. And that's what they were told them, that we got two witnesses that, maybe can help you out and put some things in the light. And plus the statement that you gave about the chain and all of that, with the additional information.
And when he refuses, the story begins to evolve a little bit. It doesn't become that the chain was snatched that day. It becomes that the chain was snatched several months earlier.
His head of security is a ex-Compton police officer. It's suspected that you have Compton gang members who came up there to do a shooting, gangland-style shooting, and yet and still, who's heading up the investigation? You have a lieutenant from Compton Police. This whole thing, it smells from high hell.
Hundreds of hours of investigation was spent on the narrative that said that this guy murdered this other person. That narrative came from the powers to be.
There's a Compton police officer by the name of Tim Brennan who is a protege of Reggie Wright Sr. Well, Tim Brennan is the first one that comes up in this investigation with the entire concept that a gang was involved and that Orlando Anderson was actually the shooter. Tim Brennan and Bobby Ladd run around talking about what great guys Reggie Wright Sr. and Horry Taylor were. And of course, this is the same Reggie Wright Sr. that the Compton Police Department says is in charge of both the gangs and drugs are disappearing from the evidence locker. And the same Horry Taylor, that's the one that has 2 keys of cocaine fall out of his locker when they investigate him after being suspended.
So obviously from a law enforcement agency looking into this, all of a sudden there's war in Compton. Basic calls are made, so quote unquote, alleged Crip members, whatever, were killed left and right. But from Las Vegas standpoint, the whole thing smells.
Tim Brennan lays the entire Orlando Anderson theory smack down in the middle of the investigation and uses a couple of confidential informants, and we have no idea of their reliability.
Oh yeah, people, embellish in search warrants to get it, so they can get it. It's not, in my experience, it wasn't something that was widely done, but there were times that you'd hear about it was done.
But seriously, what are they going to do? They're going to try to blame somebody else. And who are they going to blame in a hurry? they're going to blame somebody that they can't point the finger on, somebody that can't be named individually. They're going to name some entity. They're going to name some group, some people, some gang. But at the end of the day, they're going to lie.
And they had to get a search warrant, and they couldn't come up with, the probable cause for it. So sometimes it was embellished or, made up.
That's what Tim Brennan told me personally. He said, whenever they're ready, tell them that when they're ready to know who did it, who was in the car and all that stuff, tell them we have the evidence, we know who did it, we know exactly who was in that car that night. And he's basically saying, and I don't want to start dissension between two different departments, but he said
well, it's funny because everything we had came from Tim Brennan.
You can't always take what they say 100% true, because you always have to look at a motive for somebody of why are they saying why are they telling me what they're telling me? Do they have a motive?
You have to understand the absurdity of this. The entire narrative being manufactured is for a reason. You have to solicit a response from the judge. You have to get the judge to believe the story.
Is there some reason why they're doing this? Because it may be something other than the truth.
If they had told the judge, hey, there's just some random arm that came out of a car, we really don't know who it is, and we really don't know who was responsible for it, and it may or may not have been related to a chain snatch earlier that day or 2 months earlier, and we're really not sure of that, there's not a very good likelihood that that judge is going to sign that search warrant.
They don't like him, or they don't like the individual, or they got something against the individual, or somebody told them, I need you to pin this guy.
And no witness to the Tupac Shakur fight at the MGM said anything about Tupac saying anything, especially the line, "Are you from the South?"
Cops do it all the time.
That was intentionally added to the search warrant to give it a flavor of contradiction and to identify the South with the Southside Crips. And this was to make it appear gang motivated.
When a judge signs a search warrant, that judge is absolutely relying upon the representations made in the affidavit, and the affidavit has to be under oath.
It's important to understand that this kind of a false narrative emphasizes the fact that there was a fight and it made it Tupac versus the Southside Crips. So it set up the big fight.
The judge is relying upon the veracity and truthfulness of that police officer.
The statements made by Tim Brennan were not simply academic. They were actually made for an intended purpose and for a reason that judge would have to buy later.
And there are times, and I was a judge myself, where you get the call at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning from the drug enforcement officers that they want to come to your house and they have you sign a search warrant.
It's like when we served the search warrant on my undercover operation, the affidavit was this thick.
The affidavit says that somebody got out of the car and started talking shit. Well, that didn't happen. No witness ever said that happened. And if you really go back to think about the amount of work that would have involved, it asks a whole lot more questions.
And you got to make darn sure as a judge that you're attentive, you're attuned to what they're doing, and you have some clarity.
Well, if all your facts are based upon the opinion or assumptions of other individuals and you have no confirmation of that by other witnesses, then you're going to go back and you're going to put your affidavit together and you say, I am swearing to these truths that were given to me. And these truths may not be truth. They're only opinions and assumptions.
For example, if someone got out of the passenger side of a stopped car and walked all the way around the front of that car or around the back of that car, talking shit and holding a gun, that the bodyguards would have reacted to that. But it didn't happen.
So the detective that is getting the information must be able to confirm or to have other evidentiary value to verify them as truths.
In my era, if I was caught lying, it would have been the end of my career. I would have been fired. Right. They wouldn't have whitewashed, they would have fired me.
Each one of the statements made in Tim Brennan's affidavit that were incorrect were not made accidentally. They were made intentionally. And the reason that they were made intentionally was to alter the meaning of the search warrant. They altered the statement. It wasn't, are you from the South? Tupac said nothing like that. But if you alter it and you say, are you from the South? That's not just a simple mistake. That makes it personal, it makes it argumentative, and it makes it actionable.
They can't use you anymore. because you've already lied on the record, and therefore you have no credibility anymore, so therefore they can't use you.
And it got to the point where Compton had to do something.
It began before dawn. The crime sweep involved 300 officers, 10 agencies, including the FBI, at more than 37 locations in the Compton, Linwood, and Long Beach areas.
Based on the affidavit and the search warrant of Tim Brennan, they go ahead and they do this big gang sweep.
Of course, during the affidavit, I chased him into a house and recovered some guns out of that house.
Looking all over Compton for Orlando Anderson, but who finds him? Tim Brennan. So they haul Orlando Anderson in. Vegas police ask him a bunch of questions. And what do the Vegas police do? They walk away.
I just don't see the interest.
And Tim Brennan and the Compton PD can't figure out what the heck's going on. We're giving it to you on a silver platter, and you're just not buying.
I've heard Manning before say that, well, we treat it like every other case, and he doesn't get any special treatment because he is a celebrity, but, I don't know if I buy all that.
There was an arrest made for the murder of Tupac Shakur. It was done by Tim Brennan to Orlando Anderson.
I know the people they need to talk to solve it.
So suddenly the rhetoric starts. Now Las Vegas is incompetent, Brent Becker's incompetent, Kevin Manning's incompetent, everybody's incompetent.
The bullshit that everybody said that we didn't do anything, that's so out in left field, they're ridiculous.
And that's that. I had some problems between Las Vegas and me because they don't, like what I've said. Right. But, I just speak the truth.
In the Tim Brennan search warrant, there's mention of several gang members involved. And one of those gang members involved is a gang member by the name of Danny Patton, who also goes by the nickname of White Boy. During the service and the execution of this search warrant, many houses and residences that were involved with these gang members were searched, with the notable exception of one, and that was Danny Patton, aka White Boy. It reminds me of the old statement, don't ask a question you don't already know the answer to.
There are a lot of things that no one else knows about.
The Vegas Police Department knew exactly what was going on. It stunk to high heaven and they didn't want any part of it. On the way out, Orlando Anderson says to Brent Becker, are you going to arrest me? Brent Becker says, arrest you for what?
Do I think we know who did it? Yeah.
And the further and harder that Compton pushed the matter, the further the Vegas police backed away and the further that they didn't want anything to do with it.